Eruvin. But if Yisrael v'ger shruin b'megur sachas, you have a Jew and a convert living in the same chotzer. Umeis ger mibod yom. The convert dies before Shabbos. Let's say if another Jew had acquired the rights of the ger prior to the Shabbos, because the guy died and somebody acquired. So, and even if someone acquires it, so there will be a prohibition because the person who acquired it was not part of the Eruv. But let's say the ger was alive when Shabbos started, and he was part of the Eruv, because he was part of the Eruv when Shabbos started. So the Gemara says, Hagufa Kasha. There's something internally contradictory. Amrit mibod yom. He said, if the guy died before Shabbos and somebody else had acquired it, so what do you mean if he was not mazik? Adarabba, kilo herzik lo yosar. If the ger died and no Jew had acquired the rights of that ger, then there's only one person living in the chutzner. Remember, there were two people living in the chutzner, a Jew and the ger. The ger died. If no one was mazik, then there's nobody to prohibit. There's just one person who lives there. On Rav Papa, Ema, afal pish lo herzik. That means even though somebody was not mazik, Vaha afal pish herzik tani. It says even though somebody was mazik, it's going to come out that the Brisa says it's only it's afal pish shelo herzik, even if he was not mazik from right away, and he waited until Shabbos, then it would be a problem. Because we learn already once it's permitted, hektar lemiktzah Shabbos oiser. So hachi kamar. This is how you have to understand the Brisa. Afal pish lo herzik mibod yom. Even though a new Jew had not acquired the rights of the ger, mibod yom ela michashach. I only acquired, let's say, after Shabbos. Since he had the potential, that's what it's going to. He had the potential, even though maybe he didn't physically do it. But since another person had the potential to acquire those rights, and therefore the Jew living in that chutzner is living with somebody else besides him, that's why oyster. But if the ger was alive, when Shabbos came, the ger was alive, and he was part of the Eruv. Even if someone did not acquire it, doesn't make a difference anymore. There's going to be no prohibition because once the chutzner is permitted at the start of Shabbos, it's permitted for the whole Shabbos, like we learned yesterday. Once there's a heter mechzoso, it's a heter kulo. So first of all, the Gemara analyzed. That means it's going to be also even if another Jew had not acquired that. It's a veloma boy ki'ehzik. Adarabba ki'ehzik osar. We should say no. If somebody else acquired it, would prohibit. Amrav Papa ema afal pisha. Even if after Shabbos another Jew was machzik in the assets of the ger, it's still going to be permitted. It says just the opposite. So this is how you have to understand the price. The ger dies after Shabbos, and somebody was machzik there, but since this other person could not have been machzik from Erev Shabbos because the ger was still alive, so for even for the rest of Shabbos, eino osur. So comes out Ketani Miyas. Reisha also, we start off by saying that if the ger dies before, and somebody acquires or doesn't acquire, since there was a potential to acquire, he will asr. Why should he prohibit? Remember, he's an heir. He's like an heir. Let him be niftal. And this is going to go against Rav Nachman, who said that a yoresh, somebody who inherits property, can be mavatel. So the Gemara says, "Ein chanami, my oyser tani." He only prohibits ad shivatel, but really he has the permission to do bittul. Rav Yochanan Omar, Masnisin Mani, who is our Mishnah going like Beis Shammai? The Amri ein bittul reshus b'Shabbos. There's in fact a machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel whether a Jew is allowed to do bittul reshus on Shabbos. It's not. Meimasai nois in reshus. When can a Jew be mevatel his reshus of a chotzer? Beis Shammai Amri mibod yom. He cannot do it on Shabbos, according to Beis Shammai. He can only do it from before Shabbos. Beis Hillel Amri no. Even he can be mevatel reshus even mishetechshach. Now, what's the reason for this machlokas? Amar ulamai time to Beis Hillel. Nasiko Amar klachetzel yafos. Let's say a person sends a shaliach to give truma from his produce. He doesn't tell him exactly what kind of produce to separate. And this shaliach separates very good quality. If later on, the owner, when he sees what kind of produce was selected, he says, "Oh, you could have gotten even better." The truma is good. So you see, he's happy that the guy selected good produce. So here as well, if now the guy is being mevatel on Shabbos, it's a gilui das. It's sort of a revelation of his thought process that really he would have been happy to do it even before Shabbos. He just forgot, but it's not a problem. And Beis Hillel is learning that bittul reshus is not a kinyan. We're not allowed to do transactions on Shabbos. So Beis Hillel really doesn't view it as a kinyan. That's why he allows it to do it even on Shabbos. Freit the Gemara Amar Abaye meis nochri b'Shabbos. When a non-Jew dies on Shabbos, who's part of the Eruv. So my klach etzel yafasik, you don't have the same svara. So rather, elahachal b'hakam iflagi. This is the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The Beis Shammai savi bittul reshus make the reshusahu, who make the reshus b'Shabbos also. According to Beis Shammai, abandoning your reshus in the chotzer is like a kinyan. You're not allowed to do a kinyan on Shabbos. Ubeis Hillel savi istaluki reshus ba'almahu. He's just separating himself, and that's not a kinyan. Istaluki reshus b'Shabbos shaper dami. Leaving a reshus is not a kinyan. We don't make a gzeira mishemekach umenkar. And that's why according to Beis Hillel it's permitted. Mishnah. Balabayish ayashutaf lishchenav. Balabayas has a neighbor in a mavui. And he also happens to have investments separate from he did not make an Eruv together. But I happen to live on the same block as a guy that I have a partnership in with wine. We own wine together. The Mishnah says, Einon shrichen la'arev. They don't have to make a separate Eruv. They're already considered like one person because of their joint investment. If, let's say, they are investors together, but one owns oil and the other owns wine, then they have to make a real Eruv. However, Reb Shimon Omer, since they're a partnership, we don't care that they're partners in different things. It removes the necessity to make a name. Amar Rav stipulates with the kli echad. However, they have to own wine in the same barrel. It can't be that they own 2 barrels of wine. It's got to be the same barrel. From the fact that we said that one of them, let's say there's a barrel of wine, a barrel of oil. Oil and wine can't be stored in the same barrel, so it's got to be 2 different barrels. And let's say they went into partnership to buy those things together. There we said tzrichen la'arev. So So I understand very good why in the Reisha we say the Erev is good because they're in one Kli. And the Seif is not good because it's two Kelim. Because if you're going to tell me, but in the first case where they own the wine together, it's also 2 barrels of wine, then why would there be a difference? Mali yain v'yain, mali yain v'shemen. Then why would we say yain if me and my neighbor had gone into a joint investment with yain and shemen in 2 different kelim? Why would that be difference with yain in 2 different barrels? So Omerle Abaye yain v'yain roy la'arev. In fact, according to Abaya, not if yain were in 2 barrels, they could be mixed together. And therefore, you could make an Erev even if they were in 2 kelim. Yain v'shemen ein roy la'arev. But oil and wine don't come together. And therefore, you can't view them, you could not make an Erev because you couldn't mix them. Then came Rab Shimon and said, echad zeh v'echad zeh tzrich la'arev. So he disagreed. L'chora, he's saying that even if you have it in 2 kelim with shemen and yayin, l'chora, they could make an Erev. Afilu l'zeh b'yayin l'zeh b'shemen. It's a different case. You're talking about 2 different alleyways, and there's a chutzner between them. And then there's a chatzeros on the other side of the 2 mavlis. Rab Shimon l'tamei, this is not, on Rab Shimon. L'mad aver doime, l'sholosh chatzeros ha'psucha zulazu, u'psucha zulazu. We had a case previously in the parak. 3 chatzeros that are side by side, and they have doors that open up to all of them. Each chutzner is open up to the Rishus HaRabim. So they have to make an Eruv. Let's say the 2 outer chatzeros made an Eruv with the middle ones. He muteras imahen, vehein muteras imah. The middle chutzner can go to either of the outer chatzeros, and the 2 people in the outer chatzeros can go in the middle. The problem is the 2 outer chatzeros, shtayim achitzonos asura zumzu, because they didn't make an Eruv with each other. They made an Eruv with the middle guy. Amarle Abaye midami. The Abaye says that's not a comparison to our case. There it says very clearly that the 2 outer chatzeros are prohibited. Here it just says here, l'chora, Rab Shimon is saying they don't need to make an Eruv at all if they have the 2 barrels, even though they're 2 different barrels. So, my ein tzrichin la'arev, shchenim b'hare balabayis. He has to be a neighbor directly of the balabayis. Aval shchenim b'hare adodi, if people in the Mavi want to get together to use the mavli, then they have to make an Erev together with a piece of bread that they put in the chutzner. However, Rav Yosef Omar, Rav Shimon Rabbanan bepluk to Rav Yochanan Nuri Rabbanan Kamifli. They're arguing something else, something regarding the physical status of wine and oil. This not. Shemen shetzafal gabi yayin. Let's say you have a barrel, you have wine and oil. Now the oil is going to float on the top. And let's say there's somebody who's tamei, the nagat yom b'shemen, and a person who is tamei, who went to the mikveh, so he's a tvul yom, lo, and happens to be truma, lo pasal el shemen bilvad. Even though oil and wine are both liquids, the fact that oil is immiscible in the wine, that means it doesn't dissolve, it remains physically separate, and therefore, the shemen becomes invalidated, not the yayin. That's the Tanakama. They're connected. And therefore, if you touch the shemen, you touch the yayin. Now, the Rabbanon in our Mishnah, who said that if you have a barrel of wine, so basically this teretz says that it's not talking about 2 different barrels. We're talking about 1 barrel, oil and vinegar. oil and wine, oil and shemen, oil and wine. The Tanakama, who says that we don't allow an Eruv like that to occur, they hold like the Chachamim, that oil and shemen don't mix, they're separate, and therefore they don't really have an Eruv. Rabbi Shimon holds that they are, even because since they're both liquids, they're in contact, therefore it's considered a chibur, and therefore it's considered already that they made an Eruv. Tanya. Rabbi Yezer ben Tadoy Oimer. Echad zeh ve'echad zeh tzrichin la'ariv. So the Chachamim said that they have to, if they own oil and wine in different barrels, they have to make an Eruv. Do they say even if they own wine together? If each person came with a jug of wine and they poured it together into a barrel, that would be, and nobody argues that that's not an Eruv. Let's say there was a barrel of wine that they bought in partnership. Rabbi Yezer ben Tadoy Sovar ein breira, that you can't really separate the two. We don't say that retroactively after they use it, each one used their one individually. And therefore, since you can't separate it, you can't say that that Rabbanan Sovar yesh breira. Rabbanan say that eventually, when you use it, each one, you can rely on the partnership that each one belies, own their own. And that's the machlokas, whether they can make an Eruv or not. Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yezer ben Tadoy, Rabbanan b'soimchen al shituf b'mokom Eruv kamifli. They're arguing something else. You have chatzeros that open up into a mavui. Sometimes if you made a shituf between the people who empty up in the mavui, they don't necessarily need an Eruv chatzeros. So Mar Sover ein soimchen. One holds that just because you have a shituf mavuos does not take away the requirement that you make a shituf, that you make an Eruv chatzeros. Umar Sover soimchen. The other man says no. You can rely on the shituf mavuos to bind the chatzeros. On Rav Yosef ben Amin Elad, on Rav Yidam Arav, halacha k'Rab Meir, that the halacha is like Rab Meir, that we don't rely on a shituf to take the place of an Eruv. That you do rely on the shituf. My time is it lav mishum techad time they connected? If they're the same reasoning, why do we have two different halachas? The law of din and kitrei chumim be'eruvin. We don't paskin like two stringencies when it comes to Eruv. We're always lenient by Eruvin. And if we required shituf and chotzer, that would be two stringencies. So therefore, you have to make the psak like the two chachamim. Each one is machmer in their own, right? That Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoy requires a shituf biyayin, and like Rav Meir, that you need a shituf as well. That you need a shituf with bread as well. Now we alluded to a machlokes between Rav Meir and the chachamim as if we understood it, but the Gemara is not going to tell us what the machlokes really is. The Tanya. Ma'arvin b'chatzeres papas. That when you make an Eruv chatzeres, you need to use bread. And you can't use wine. Imratzu la'arv b'yayin ein ma'arvin. If you're going to collect money from all the people who open up into the chatzer, and you buy a barrel of wine, that's not going to work. You got to use bread. Continues the Tanakama. Mishtatfin b'mavui b'yayin. You have multiple chatzeros opening up into a mavui. And you want to combine all of them so that the people from the chatzeros can carry into the mavui. You make a shituf with wine. If they want to participate with bread, they can as well. Why? So, no, that ma'arvin bechatzeros, Normally, we make an eruv for the chatzeros, and we make mishtatfin b'mavui. And separately, you don't rely on just the eruv. You need to make a shituf mavuyas. If we were going to rely on making shituf mavuyas, and that would cover your chatzeros, the future generations are not going to know anything about eruv chatzeros. Div Rab Meir. The chachamim oimrim, no. You have your choice. You can do a shituf, and that would cover the chatzeros. They say, O ma'arvin, O mishtatfin. Now, in this machlokas, pligi barav nechum v'rabbo, chad amar b'pas, that if you try to make a shituf mavuos with bread, that's enough. And the bread will work for both. Where is the machlokas? Ki pligi bayayin. That's the machlokas. If you're going to use wine, will that work for both? And we'll explain the machlokas when we pick this up tomorrow. So tonight, we're going to learn Navi